Kalal Yahweh, Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, Ba'Shem Rakakwadash. Double honors unto the elders and the apostles who taught me this truth. This is your brother Dawad, the real brother beloved, and this is only for the
elect.
Only for the elect. The reason you came around is because you thought we had the truth and that we was men of the Lord.
Now to that massive explosion that's killed dozens of people and injured thousands more in Lebanon. This blast rocking Beirut and sending a mushroom cloud into the sky like a scene out of a science fiction film. Bill Neely has late details.
Extraordinary images tonight of deadly explosions felt by millions in Lebanon. Blasts that shook a city and injured thousands. This was the first, coming just after 6 in the evening at Beirut's main port, sending up a plume of thick smoke. Beneath it, fires raging and flashes of light, filmed by nearby residents. None of them could have guessed what would happen next. A second massive explosion that some described as like an earthquake. A mushroom cloud of debris and seawater blasted into the air. The detonation was heard 200 miles away in at least 2 other countries.
I saw something flash and I couldn't hear anymore. It was raining glass all over the city of Beirut.
On the ground, dozens lay dead. Lebanon's health minister says almost 3,000 people have been injured. The port area destroyed. But what caused it?
For if ye shall diligently keep all these commandments which I command you, to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to cleave unto him, then will the Lord drive out all these nations from before you, and ye shall possess greater nations and mightier than yourselves. Every place whereon the soles of your feet shall tread shall be yours, from the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even unto the uttermost sea shall your coast be. There shall no man be able to stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land that ye shall tread upon, as he hath said unto you.
Shalom, Yasharallah. By now you're all aware of the massive explosion in Lebanon at a warehouse that the authorities are saying stored highly explosive materials, which left dozens of Lebanese citizens dead and many more injured. Officials suggest they warned for years about the dangerous explosive chemicals stored in that warehouse, but their fears went unanswered. The hopeful elect know better than that, though, don't we? Concerning biblical Lebanon, we're going to jump right in. The Zondervan Bible Dictionary, 1963 edition reads, Lebanon, Hebrew meaning white, a snow-clad mountain range extending in a northeasterly direction for 100 miles along the Syrian coast, from Tyre to Arvad and the country which bears its name. The most recent edition reads, the name of a mountainous region in Phoenicia, just inland from the coast, called simply Mount Lebanon in Judges chapter 3, verse 3, New International Version, the Lebanon Mountains. Its area corresponds roughly to that of the modern state of Lebanon, but the latter includes also the strip of land on the coast as well as the Baca Valley and the western slopes of the anti-Lebanon mountains. Both editions go on to say its name alludes to the whiteness either of the fossil-bearing limestone cliffs or the snowy crests of this mountain system. Strictly speaking, Lebanon lies outside Palestine, and though included in the Most High's promise, it was never totally occupied. Its isolated crags, however, supported watchtowers, refuge points, and came to symbolize the exalted status of Judah's royal house. Reading on and roughly summarizing, ancient Lebanon was heavily forested and budding with a variety of foliage, including the Phoenician juniper, which was above all the great cedars of Lebanon. Biblically, the height of the trees in Lebanon were sometimes meant to symbolize dignity, pride, and their growth, resistance to decay or being spoiled. This is Jeremiah chapter 22, verse 6, and it reads, For thus saith Yahweh unto the king's house of Judah, Thou art Gilead unto me, and the head of Lebanon. Yet surely I will make thee a wilderness, and cities which are not inhabited. In ancient times, Gilead was known for its fruitfulness as a country, particularly in its cultured inhabitants and substance, not to mention its riches and in all sorts of valuable things. Yet the Most High promises the house of the king of Judah, who is likened unto Gilead's prosperity in the top of Mount Lebanon, symbolizing the head of Israel. He will eradicate its population, leave it barren, and strip it of its glory and wealth. And the same was promised to all Israel, using Lebanon as a symbol. This is Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 3, and it reads, And say, Thus saith the Lord power, a great eagle with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers, which had divers colors, came unto Lebanon, and took the highest branch of the cedar. That eagle is speaking of America. Symbolically, the eagle is mentioned throughout this chapter more than once, but it is the same world power. Throughout history, we know the nation of Esau and its transfer of rule from one empire to the next have all been represented by the eagle, particularly the Roman Empire and America, which had Israel in captivity. As a matter of fact, all the civilizations throughout the Bible that exiled or held Israel captive under that same wicked vibration was represented by birds of prey, the hawk, falcon, and eagle. And took the highest branch is speaking of the Israelites. Verse 4, He cropped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into a land of traffic. He set it in a city of merchants. Now, when you go into the Hebrew, the definition given for traffic is Strong's Hebrew 3667, Canaan, meaning lowland, and the fourth son of Ham and the progenitor of the Phoenicians, and of the various nations who peopled the seacoast of Palestine. The land west of the Jordan peopled by the descendants of Canaan and subsequently conquered by the Israelites under Joshua. To me that says, and this is me in total agreement with any of the elders who taught America and even Canada or Canaan, New Canaan, Canaan 4 are too a part of Israel's inheritance. Lebanon is a part of that promise as well. The Strong's goes on to say from the Hebrew 3665, humiliated and merchant, relative to Hebrew 5503 in the Strong's, merchant trade, merchant man, and 87404, merchandise. We know this is speaking of this latter definition because of the idea that follows the semicolon, explaining it with the next sentence, he set it in a city of merchants. Now let's go to the dictionary and see where it takes us from there. The Merriam-Webster defines traffic, and forgive me, we won't spend much more time on this, but I have to paint a picture to make this point. The Merriam-Webster defines traffic as 2, the volume of customers visiting a business establishment, restaurant traffic. 3A, the passengers or cargo carried by a transportation system. B, the business, which I think should be written in all caps, of transporting passengers or freight. 4A, import and export trade. How about cargo slave ships on a transatlantic slave trade? B, the business of bartering or buying and selling, and that brings to mind Revelation 13 and 17. C, illegal or disreputable, usually commercial activity. The drug traffic is an example. What about sex traffic or human trafficking? What we need to put this definition to bed is the etymology dictionary. It defines traffic as trade and commerce, to buy and sell, relative to traffic with a K. Lastly, the Wiktionary explains the use of this spelling for traffic in relation to illegal trafficking, probably influenced by the spelling of the noun trafficking. Ergo, this land of business and city of commerce and trade, where they bought, sold, and trafficked goods, including the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Indians, without a shadow of a doubt is speaking of New Rome, spiritual Sodom in Egypt, aka the United States of America, also referred to as Babylon the Great. Now, bear with me, I'm going to bring this home. Verse 5, he took also of the seed of the land and planted it in a fruitful field. America was, and to some extent still is, a fruitful land, as effed up and polluted as it is. At one time it was vast and viable in resources. He placed it by great waters and set it as a willow tree. Those great waters represent many people. This is Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 6, and it reads, "And it grew and became a spreading vine of low stature, whose branches turned toward him, and the roots thereof were under him. So it became a vine, and brought forth branches, and shot forth sprigs. That vine, no longer the stature of the cedars in Lebanon, brought low, running on the ground, in need and dependent on something else, is speaking of Israel, meaning the Hebrew Israelites." A quick precept. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 48, and it reads, "Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things, in need and dependent on, in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee." A yoke of iron, clearly speaking of the slave trade. Verse 49, "The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle." Let me read that again. "The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand." Again, that speaks to Rome in the siege of 70 AD and America in the transatlantic slave trade. In the interest of time, let's jump down to Ezekiel 17 and 12. "Say now to the rebellious house," speaking of Israel pursuant to Ezekiel 2 and 5 and 17 and 15, "Know ye not what these things mean? Tell them, behold, the king of Babylon is come to Jerusalem, and hath taken the king thereof, and the princes thereof, and led them with him to Babylon." Although scattered, most of Israel, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Indians, remained in New Babylon, which again is America to this present day. Let's switch gears and we'll circle this ship in a minute. Now, throughout history, Babylon is known for its mystery religions, the origin of masonry and Masonic principles, astrology, enchantments, practices in witchcraft, and the Tower of Babel, which in total is the spawn of all wickedness and earthly confusion. What is seldom spoken of besides the creation of commercial slave trade, the buying and selling of slaves and souls in maritime law, is Babylon's creation of money, legal tender, and the credit system. Now, credit preceded the exchange of money in the ancient world and was based on two commodities, grain and silver. Before the idea of coin money used in loans, grain and silver was used to assist in trade, silver in cities and grain throughout the country. And guess what else came into play through this money loan and credit system? Interest rates, what is biblically known as usury. This is Exodus chapter 22, verse 25, and it reads, "If thou lend money to any of my people that is poor by thee, thou shalt not be to him a usurer, neither shalt thou lay upon him usury." In the Hebrew, usury is simply described as interest on a debt. What is modern day banking? Debt currency and interest rates. Grossly inflated interest or not, according to the scriptures, it still classifies as usury. This is the current system that is being used by the Federal Reserve, privately owned and operated central banks that enslave the people. No different than King Nebuchadnezzar leveraging Babylon's gold and issuing IOUs, which led to silver being offered for gold, then copper, inflation, then loss of value, and finally an empire in debt. Nimrod, the great hunter of men himself, issued clay tablet receipts with a priest's seal, presenting it in the value of gold. This is Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 6, and it reads, "Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his?" Speaking of ancient Assyria and Babylon's little sister, the Chaldeans, How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. In the Hebrew, thick clay is in reference to the weight of pledges, meaning the stress of having to pay back loans from receiving credit, heavy debts. Manipulation of today's economic system pursuant to Babylon's ingenuity and greed has led to the red seal and gold standard of the American dollar bill to having no intrinsic value, and the reason why the federal government feels the need to quarantine you, shut down businesses, demonize, and to some extent ban hand-to-hand transactions and the use of paper money in an attempt to enact a financial reset and implement his RFID microchip beast system. Let's watch this clip.
Thank you. And just moments ago, President Trump strongly suggested that the Beirut explosion was no accident. Jeff Bennett is at the White House with late details.
President Trump tonight describing the massive explosion in Beirut as an attack.
And I've met with some of our great generals, and they just seem to feel that this was not some kind of a manufacturing explosion type of event. It was a bomb of some kind.
Since this clip, the DOD has dialed back the administration's narrative, and the MSM is now offering a detailed timeline as to how the ammonium nitrate arrived in that warehouse. This timeline includes phrases like Russian vessels and Beirut seaport, seafaring violations, banned chemicals that killed Americans, known dangerous abandonment, and accident. Fair enough, but what or who caused this accident? This is 2 Ezra chapter 15, verse 28, and it reads, Behold, an horrible vision, and the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia, and that is speaking of the Ishmaelites, the modern-day Arabs, shall come out with many chariots, and a multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon the earth, that all they which hear them may fear and tremble. And this is speaking about the military of the various nations of the so-called Middle East. Verse 30, also the Carmanians, who were the revitalized Persian Empire, today they are known as the Iranians, raging in wrath shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come, and join battle with them, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians, and that land being situated somewhere between northern Iraq and Turkey in present day. And then shall the dragons have the upper hand, remembering their nature, and if they shall turn themselves conspiring together in great power to persecute them, then these shall be troubled, bled, and keep silence through their power, and shall flee. The wars being waged by Israel via America in the so-called Middle East go beyond the annexing of land, temples, and holy books. At least it does more for one side. The underlying truth is the Muslims have a huge portion of the earth's population under anti-usury laws. This is a problem for the globalists in their securing subservient slaves for their new world order. Essentially because these predominant Muslim nations insist against riba, quote, a concept in Islam that refers broadly to the concept of growth, increasing or exceeding, which in turn forbids interest credited from loans or deposits, roughly translated as the pursuit of illegal exploitive gains made in business or trade under Islamic law and akin to usury. Because those who practice the faith will be the last to hold out against usury, ergo the idea of being chipped poses what is seen as a major threat to the Zionist agenda. Only two things can happen as far as the elitists are concerned: an end to the practice of Islam as the world knows it, and a Rothschild centralized bank in every Middle Eastern territory, a plan they've committed to years ago. Yes, most don't consider Lebanon an Arab country, as the Lebanese are not ethnically Arab and being almost equally divided amongst practitioners of Islam and Christianity, the Christians considering themselves Phoenicians, but they do speak an Arabic dialect, and needless to say, especially under Hezbollah, have a conflicted relationship with U.S. ally modern-day Israel. This pandemic has ravished business, particularly of oil in the so-called Middle East. Despite that, it's no coincidence Lebanon is under its second month of hyperinflation. According to several financial reports, quote, the Lebanese economy became dependent on regular injections of U.S. dollars to create a veneer of financial stability, and the central bank offered high interest rates to private banks in exchange for debt in U.S. dollars. Yes, the state owns the central bank in Lebanon, not the Rothschilds, but what does that really mean? In any event, let's close out on this. Clearly, this explosion in Beirut is part and parcel to Yahweh's judgments coming to pass to all those that stood confederate against the nation of Israel, as well as it is a precursor to his promise to cleanse the land. This is Numbers chapter 35, verse 33, and it reads, So ye shall not pollute the land wherein ye are, for blood it defileth the land, and the land cannot be cleansed of the blood that is shed therein, but by the blood of him that shed it. And that blood shed through idolatry, the worship of idols, that has led to endless debate and fighting amongst nations, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over Israelite land. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, one, there's a mandate for the elite, as suggested by Albert Pike pursuant to the Third World War, to destroy the West and Christianity using Islam, creating a new religious system which all Muslims will follow. And two, Lebanon is on Babylon the Great's and Esau's long-standing to-do list of so-called Middle Eastern regions they promised to take out: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, ending with Iran. In any event, Yahweh is in total control. The same manner Israel was brought down to a lower state is the same manner the Most High's enemies will be recompensed. This is Isaiah chapter 29, verse 15, and it reads, Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord, and their works are in the dark, and they say, Who seeth us, and who knoweth us? And this is speaking of Esau, Edom, the wicked, and his covert operations to subdue and oppress the people. Surely our turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay. For shall the work say of him that made it, He made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, He hath no understanding? Is it not yet a very little while, and Lebanon shall be turned into a fruitful field, and a fruitful field shall be esteemed as a forest? And in that day shall the deaf hear the words of the book, and the eyes of the blind shall see out of obscurity and out of darkness. The meek, meaning the elect of Israel, scattered across the four corners of the earth, also shall increase their joy in the Lord, and the poor among men shall rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. Through the power and spirit, I hope you are edified. Double honors unto the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and rule well. Salutations to the hopeful elect. Shalom, Yasharala. Don't take that chip.